James Wilson once said, "I love you like my life, I can't live without you." However, as our 7-year relationship came to an end, he finally agreed to marry me. I thought we would have a happy marriage, but I never expected his heart to gradually stray. 3 days before the wedding, I learned that he had decided to have a trial run with his assistant, encouraged by his brother. Despair and collapse struck, and I chose to run away from the wedding. I returned to my life as a rich girl in Beijing, and this time, I was going to make him pay for it. 3 days before the wedding, I found a torn black stocking under the bed in the bridal room. At that moment, I could hardly believe my eyes. I wanted to tell myself that a thief had broken into the house. But this was the bridal room of James and me, located in a high-end residence in the city, with impeccable security. Only he and I had the key. Who was having an affair here? It was obvious. I couldn't help but think of the message James' brother Frank had sent a week ago. "Bro, people say you should have sex before marriage. Do you want me to find someone for you to try?" When I saw it, James didn't respond to me, and I still felt really uncomfortable, so I lost my temper and kept arguing with him until he blocked Frank. At that time, he was still affectionately pinching my nose and laughing at me for being petty. James said it was just a joke between their brothers. Before every brother got married, Frank would send a message like this, called Verified True Heart. He also promised me that he would always love only me and protect me. But now, what is all this? After 7 years of dating, I never expected him to play his role so well, so convincingly. Looking at the black silk, looking at the big bed, I trembled all over, nausea rushed to my throat, and finally I rushed to the toilet and vomited uncontrollably. At that moment, the phone rang. It was James. I froze for a moment before answering. His voice was still gentle and considerate. "Emma, where are you? Shall we have lunch together at noon? I'll come pick you up." But after all, I hadn't caught him in the act, and at the moment I didn't even have the courage to question him. I could only hold back the bitterness in my heart, and said softly, "I'm not feeling well, I don't want to go out." As soon as he heard this, immediately became anxious. "Where does it hurt? Has your aunt come early? I'd better come back and check on you. I'm always worried when you're alone at home." Listening to his concern, I felt a little dazed. A man who can remember the date of my aunt so clearly would really betray me before the wedding? But the broken black silk just wouldn't go away. The intense feeling of tearing made my throat feel like something was stuck in it, and I couldn't speak. Seeing that I didn't respond, James became even more anxious. "Are you home? Wait for me. I'll go home right now and make you some brown sugar water." But I wasn't ready to face him at all. I could only respond hastily, "It's fine, you don't need to come back. I just feel a little dizzy. I'll just rest for a bit." James was still worried. "Are you really fine? Maybe I should go back and check on you. You wait for me." I tried to calm down, trying to sound normal. "Really, you don't need to. I'll call you after I wake up." Just then, a voice came from next to me. "Mr. Wilson, are you going home?" Someone asked if he wanted to have lunch together. It was a feminine voice, sounding a little familiar, like Sarah's. Could this innocent-looking girl really be the one he cheated on me with? James didn't respond to her, just continued to reassure me. "If you're still not feeling well, you must call me." He finally relented. I answered absent-mindedly, then hung up. I sat in the marital room for a long time, before going out to buy a surveillance camera to install in the room. After completing all this, I felt as if all the strength had been sucked out of me. Back in the apartment where I now live, lying on the bed, tears silently slipped down my face. If this is really the case, what should I do? When James returned, I was still half asleep. His slightly cool hand on my slightly damp forehead brought a feeling of comfort and instantly woke me up. I opened my eyes and instinctively avoided his touch. He looked a little surprised, but soon smiled tenderly. "Scared? I dialed your number, but there was no answer. Luckily, I came home early and found you had a fever. You silly pig, you don't know how to take care of yourself at all. Without me, what would you do? Take the fever-reducing medicine first. You'll feel better after taking it." As he spoke, he gave me a concerned lecture. After that, he helped me up and personally fed me water and medicine, just like he always did. I silently accepted his care, but my heart felt desolate. James and I met in college. He spent 3 years wooing me before I finally confirmed the relationship. For him, I fell out with my family, didn't go home for a few years, and now we've come this far. It's obvious that we're just one step away from a happy ending. But at this moment, he saw that I was silent and began to panic a little. He forced me into his arms and asked with concern, "Emma, what's wrong? Are you upset because I didn't come home at noon?" "I'm sorry, it's my fault." I leaned against his chest, held back my tears, and asked him in a muffled voice, "James, are you really never going to betray me?" James stroked my head, smiled tenderly, and said, "Baby, don't say silly things. We've worked so hard to get to where we are today, and I will only love you." He sighed, let go of me, and wiped away the tears at the corners of my eyes with a loving smile. "You're going to be a beautiful bride. Why are you still crying? Are you nervous?" I looked at the depth of his affection in his eyes, and secretly hoped that it was all a lie and someone's cruel joke. I stubbornly stared at him, and well, there was definitely some pre-wedding jitters. "But if you betray me, I'll leave you forever and punish you." James's eyes flashed with panic. He touched his nose and smiled. "How could that be? I would never betray you. You are the person I love most in this life." I laughed, and tears flowed down my face. At that moment, I really hated myself a little that I knew James too well. I knew all his little lies and tricks. James looked at me with confusion, thinking that there was something wrong with me today. But soon, as usual, I bossed him around and told him to go cook dinner for me. He visibly relaxed and happily went out. The moment he turned around, my face gradually grew heavy. In fact, before James proposed to me, my mother had called me. She told me that James never wanted to get married and told me to stop procrastinating my life. I made a bet with her. If James didn't propose on our 7th anniversary, I would agree to go through with the marriage. I thought I would win, but James made me lose in a completely different way. After a short moment of shock, I still dialed my mother's phone number. "Mom, I agreed to the marriage. The sooner the better. Please prepare for the wedding," I said. She let out a sigh, without asking any further questions. She just told me to take care of myself and said she would take care of everything. At that moment, James happened to walk in. He heard a few words I said and asked in alarm, "Emma, who were you talking to?" "What wedding?" I hung up the phone, smiled faintly, and asked him, "Which wedding is there?" He mistook me for talking about our wedding, and his frown immediately relaxed. At dinner, James seemed distracted, staring at his phone. My appetite vanished instantly, and I asked softly, "Is there something wrong?" He hesitated for a long time before saying carefully, "Well, there's an emergency at work." I gazed into his eyes, thinking to myself, "Do you really need to go back?" A flicker of hesitation flashed in James's eyes, and it took him a long time to make a decision. "It's fine, I can stay here if you want. Let them deal with it first. After all, you're still sick." But his frequent glances at his phone revealing his true thoughts. I picked up a piece of bamboo shoot and put it in my mouth. What I used to find delicious tasted like chewing wax. "I'm not a 3-year-old. I can take care of myself. Go on, don't delay the important business." Hearing me say this, he immediately took over the conversation. "Then I'd better go back. If I can take care of it before the wedding, I won't have to worry about it afterwards." I looked down and took a bite of my rice, trying to hide the tears in my eyes. "Okay, then you can go early and come back quickly." His eyes showed obvious joy, and after a few random mouthfuls of rice, he told me not to wash the dishes, and hurriedly left. I lost my appetite, staring blankly at the table of food I loved, my heart empty. Half an hour later, I opened the surveillance monitor with trembling hands. I hoped so much that I was wrong, that I had misunderstood something. But the sound coming from the monitor clearly told me the truth. The man who had loved me for 7 years had finally betrayed me. I covered my chest, my heart was in agony, tears flowed incessantly, and my breathing became rapid. I wanted to scream, but the sound was suppressed in my throat. His familiar voice rang in my ears. "I never thought you were so innocent on the surface, but you are so promiscuous in bed, it really surprised me." Sarah asked with a coquettish smile, "So did you like it? Am I better than your fiance?" James sighed contentedly. "Of course you are, you little demon." The phone in my hand fell heavily to the ground, and I could no longer hold back my sobs. It turned out that a moment of passion could surpass years of affection. 7 years of love had ended up being a joke. I don't know how long I cried for, until my tears ran dry, and I numbly saved the video. I didn't sleep all night, and James didn't come home either. It wasn't until the next morning he hurried back. Seeing my swollen eyes, the pain in his eyes seemed real. Probably thinking that I would be angry with him for not coming home last night, he was a little nervous and hurriedly explained, "Emma, what happened to your eyes?" "I'm sorry, That program was really complicated, so I stayed up late to get it done. Was it really the program that was difficult to handle, or was the little demon elusive? Without sleep all night, I thought about many things and was thoroughly disheartened. Facing his lies, I said with sarcasm, "I had a nightmare last night, dreaming that you cheated on me, and I cried a lot." James froze for a moment, his face instantly turning pale, but he quickly regained his composure. "You really are prone to overthinking things. We're about to get married. How could I possibly do anything to hurt you? Be good, rest at home today, so you can be the most beautiful bride tomorrow. I'm going to take a shower, and I have to go back to the office to continue working." I gave a small smile and said nothing more. But in my heart, I asked myself, if we are going to get married, why would you do anything to hurt me? When James was about to leave, I stopped him. "After work tonight, go straight to the new house. In my hometown, there is a custom. The night before the wedding, you cannot see each other." James froze for a moment, and a flash of joy appeared in his eyes. He came over and hugged me tightly, and said with deep feeling, "Then get ready tomorrow. I'll come pick you up." Thinking about being able to have a good time that night, he didn't wait for my response and left in a hurry. As I watched him go, I whispered, "James, I won't wait for you this time." Soon after, Sarah posted a friend request. She was wearing sexy pajamas and leaning against the floor-to-ceiling windows. In the reflection of the glass, there was the shadow of a man holding a mobile phone. I recognized him at once as James. She even added a comment, "Men love little devils, even those in pure love." The acid in my stomach churned again, and I forced myself to suppress the nausea to give her a like. She quickly deleted the post, and I didn't care anymore. I booked a flight for the afternoon and prepared to return to Jing City. After successfully purchasing the ticket, I threw out everything in my apartment that belonged to me. He doesn't deserve to own anything of mine anymore. It really makes me sick. I took down all the photos on the wall and tore them up and smashed them. With each photo I took down, my heart felt a little lighter. The wedding dress that James had custom made for me I cut up and hung in a conspicuous place by the door. I also saved the video from that night on my tablet and set it to play in a loop. After everything was ready, I left a note. "James, you really disgust me. It's over between us. I'll never forgive you. Just wait for the punishment I'll give you." The $1 million ring I casually threw on the paper along with the cheap black silk. Before boarding the plane, I sent a message to my mother asking her to send someone to pick me up. The moment the plane took off, everything between James and I became the past. And running away from the wedding was only my first punishment for him. After getting off the plane, it was already evening. There were several missed calls on my phone and a bunch of messages, all from James. "Emma, is the lazy pig still asleep? I really miss you. I can't wait to see you in your wedding dress tomorrow. I hope tomorrow comes quickly." When I saw this message, I couldn't help but sneer, and I replied to him, "I woke up, looking forward to tomorrow, and I have a surprise for you." James quickly replied to me. He rambled on about how he cared about me. Even though at this moment he was lying in bed, embracing another woman, he still sent me a message. What a good man! From discovering the truth to confirmation, and finally a heart of ashes, now that I see them entangled again, there is no more turmoil in my heart. I turned off the monitor, did not reply to him, and walked quickly out of the airport. My mother said she would send someone to pick me up, but I never expected it to be my matchmaker, the prince of the Beijing Circle, Nathan Parker. We are still in love for the first time. When I was a child, I often went to his house for dinner. Later, my studies were heavy. I went to study in Hong Kong. After I started dating James, I didn't go home for a few years, and gradually drifted apart. My memories of him stayed with me from high school. After 7 years apart, he is now mature and stable, with quite the air of a domineering CEO. I wasn't surprised that my mother chose him as a marriage partner. After all, the two families are well matched. What surprised me was that he was willing to accept. Seeing me standing there in a daze, Nathan gave a small smile and then walked over to open the car door for me. We hadn't seen each other for years, so he didn't recognize me? I laughed. Of course he did. I just didn't expect him to come and pick me up. Nathan's eyes darkened. He stroked my head gently and said softly, "Of course I have to personally take responsibility for picking up my fiance." His tone was serious, his eyes full of tenderness, and I couldn't help blushing. But thinking about my 7 years of relationship with James, my heart inevitably became heavy. I nodded lightly and felt myself get into the car. He didn't ask about my emotional changes. Instead, along the way, he talked about many things from his childhood, trying to make me happy. I responded casually, but my mind was full of tomorrow's events. I wondered if James would be as surprised as I was the day I discovered his infidelity and find out that I had run away from the wedding. I actually looked forward to it. How much pain I felt, I hoped he would feel the same pain. After dropping me off at home, Nathan did not linger. After all, there was still much to prepare for the wedding the day after tomorrow, and he was personally in charge of it all. But as I entered the door, he called out to me, "Emma, are you really sure you won't regret this?" His gaze was like fire, and the depth of his feelings almost burned me. I was a little confused, not understanding why he was so affectionate. But I told him firmly that I had made up my mind, that I would never regret it, and that I would try to be a good wife. He let out a sigh of relief, his eyebrows arched, like a happy child. I thought for a moment, and said in a low voice, "I have a request. If one day you want to be with someone else, please tell me in advance. I can choose to withdraw, but please don't lie to me." He probably knew about James and me from my mother, and his eyes revealed his pain. "Okay, I promise you, I will never lie to you. I will prove my heart with my whole life." He said every word very seriously, and my heart, which had cooled because of James, gradually began to warm up. I gave my first real smile in a few days and nodded gently. Nathan hesitated for a moment, but then walked up to me and embraced me. The wide embrace made me feel inexplicably at ease. Coincidentally, my mother walked out at this time and saw us embracing. She couldn't stop smiling. "Good, good. It should have been like this a long time ago. You two are really a perfect match." I noticed Nathan's ears were slightly red, and I couldn't help wondering. He was so innocent. Had he never been with a girl before? He let go of my hand, greeted my mother politely, and left reluctantly. After Nathan left, my mother told me about him. It turned out that he had learned that my mother intended to arrange a marriage for me, so he came to the door on his own initiative. He said that he had liked me since childhood, but had never dared to confess, and had missed the opportunity for many years. He implored my mother to consider him first. Our families are on good terms, and my parents have known him since he was a child, so they were naturally very happy. When they heard that I was going home to get married, they immediately agreed. I was overwhelmed with emotion. No wonder he looked at me with such deep affection. It turns out that while I was foolishly waiting for James for 7 years, someone else was silently in love with me. I won't let down the sincere heart, and I hope he feels the same. That night, I felt an immense sense of peace, and slept exceptionally soundly, looking forward to the drama of tomorrow. I woke up the next day. It was already 10 o'clock. I leisurely finished breakfast before slowly turning on the surveillance camera in the apartment. James had brought a large entourage to pick me up, along with Sarah. He knocked on the door of the apartment with a happy face, but I felt a sense of irony. After waiting for a long time without a response, James became anxious and restless, pacing back and forth in front of the door with his phone in his hand. At that moment, my phone also rang. I didn't answer it immediately, but quietly watched it ring and stop, and then stopped again. It wasn't until he was about to lose patience on the monitor that I slowly picked up the phone. Finally finding me, he let out a sigh of relief with a tone of both reprimand and affection. "Emma, you've been so naughty. I've been waiting at the door for a long time. Open the door and don't keep me waiting." I laughed softly and said, "Just come in, I've got a surprise for you." After that, I hung up the phone. I watched as James opened the door, and the first thing he saw was the wedding dress, which was in tatters. Just like our love, it was completely destroyed. The people in the wedding procession looked at each other in disbelief, and James cried out my name in a state of collapse. He frantically rushed into every room, but couldn't find a trace of me. At that moment, the preset video began to play automatically. James' brothers, relatives, and employees heard the shrill sound and rushed towards the tablet. When James walked out, everyone was shocked, and Sarah's face was even paler. James sensed something was wrong, and immediately rushed over. As soon as he saw the video playing on the tablet, his pupils suddenly dilated, and he was full of disbelief. How could this be? How could this be? He hastily turned off the video, and only then did he notice the note on the table and the black silk. Along with my engagement ring, which I once treasured, it was also casually placed on the black silk. The familiar handwriting stung his eyes like a sharp blade, and made his whole body tremble involuntarily. Frank wanted to go over and offer some words of comfort, but he was grabbed by the collar and thrown a punch. His eyes were burning with anger, and he yelled at the top of his lungs, "It's all your fault. If you hadn't given me that idea of a trial marriage, how could I have betrayed Emma? You're the one who got me into this. Give Emma back to me." Frank had been punched twice, and his anger flared. He threw a punch. "I was just kidding. You're the one who did it. You couldn't resist the temptation. And you're blaming me? You're sick." Ugh. Frank pushed James to the ground and left, cursing. I watched the two scumbags tear each other apart in front of the surveillance camera. I felt so good. The others, seeing this, said something disparaging and turned away. Only Sarah still had the nerve to come up to them and spoke sweetly as usual. "Mr. Wilson, Emma really doesn't know any better. Even if she did, she should have told you nicely, not treat you like this. She doesn't appreciate you." As she spoke, she leaned in close to James without noticing his expression at all. He grabbed Sarah by the hair, pulling her away from him, his tone cold. "You deliberately left those black stockings in the wedding room, didn't you? I warned you, don't get any ideas. You think you can replace Emma? Dream on." Sarah was in agony, tears streaming down her face, crying out, "I'm sorry. I know I've made a mistake. I won't do it again. Let go of me." James reached out and slapped her, threw her to the ground. "Get out! You're fired." Sarah turned pale, begging for mercy. "Mr. Wilson, I can't lose this job. My father is waiting for me to get the money for his treatment. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. You can punish me however you like. Please don't fire me." But James remained unmoved, grabbed her by the collar, and dragged her out. After closing the door, James slumped to the ground, full of remorse. Seeing him in such pain gave me a sense of satisfaction, so I turned off the surveillance camera. With everyone turning their backs on him, this was my second punishment for him. As soon as I turned off the camera, my phone rang. It was James. This time I answered quickly. On the other end of the line, he was silent for a long time before he choked out, "I was wrong. It's you I love. I was just confused. I've already fired Sarah. Can you come back?" I sneered. "Firing her can't make up for the damage you've done to me. James, you're the one who chose to betray our 7 years of love. When I first saw Frank's text message, I already warned you. Do you remember how you promised me with all your heart?" James burst into tears, full of remorse. He said, "It's my fault. I shouldn't have listened to Frank. Just forgive me once, Emma. It was the only time she and I had sex. I promise I'll never do it again. If you can forgive me, I'll do anything you want." Sometimes when people are at a loss for words, they end up laughing. I never thought that at a time like this, he would still want to lie to me. I asked with a sneer, "That night you had a fever. Did you really go back to the office?" James was instantly speechless. After a long silence, I felt bored and simply hung up. After that, when he called again, I didn't answer. He sent a lot of messages, just like when he was courting me, but my heart had already cooled. How could it warm up so easily? I didn't block him. Giving him a little hope will make him feel even more remorseful and try harder to win me back. He asked if I had returned to Beijing, and I didn't respond. But when I was having dinner with Nathan that night, I asked his permission and posted a photo of the two of us in my moments. The location was a hotel in Beijing, the same place where he and I were getting married the next day. James was right on top of me, as usual. As soon as the photo was posted, he started messaging me nonstop, asking me who the man was. Looking at the endless stream of messages, I could almost imagine James's anxious face. The unknown is always the most frightening. I was terrified at first, and now he should experience it for himself. I asked Nathan, "Do you think I'm vindictive? Do you think I'm horrible?" Nathan's eyes were full of concern, and he gently reassured me, "No, people who betray the heart deserve 1,000 punishments. No punishment is too severe. You're only making him feel a little of your pain." When he finished speaking, his sincere tone deeply moved me, and my eyes couldn't help but fill with tears. I did this in front of him because I wanted to show him the real me. If he really loves me, he should love all of me, including the side of me that no one knows. If he can't do that, then I won't marry him tomorrow. Fortunately, he really understands me. I gazed at Nathan, and said with emotion, "Why didn't you confess your love to me earlier? Maybe I wouldn't have experienced so much suffering." His face instantly turned red, and the image of the overbearing CEO instantly turned into that of a pure-hearted puppy. I was too timid back then. I'm really sorry. I came too late and let you suffer." Seeing him apologize so earnestly, I couldn't bear to continue teasing him and laughed. "Okay, then I'll punish you for being good to me for the rest of your life." He smiled knowingly, as if he was willing. I couldn't help but exclaim, "My elders really do have better judgment than I do. They know who is more suitable for me." When I got home, James sent me his last message, "Emma, wait for me. I'm on my way to Beijing. Let's meet." Maybe he thought I would be as weak as before if we met. Unfortunately, this time it didn't work, but provoking him to come to Beijing was exactly my goal. After all, I wanted him to witness my happiness with his own eyes. I thought I would be unable to sleep, but I had a good night's sleep instead. When I woke up, my makeup artist was already at home. My mother looked at me with joy as I got dressed and put on the dragon and phoenix wedding gown. At that moment, I finally felt a sense of reality. Today, I'm getting married. However, this marriage partner is no longer James. Seeing my mother smile, her eyes filled with tears, I couldn't help but feel my eyes well up. This scene they have been waiting for me for a whole year. For James, I have rebelled time and time again, almost breaking their hearts. Now, everything is finally back on track. Taking my father's hand, I walked into the hotel and gradually approached Nathan in the center of the stage. There was loud applause from the audience as family and friends sent their blessings. Just as the host asked if I would marry Nathan, James suddenly barged in. I saw him at once. He looked haggard, completely different from his usual self. Before I could say anything to stop him, someone covered his mouth and dragged him away. He struggled desperately, his eyes full of pleading as he looked at me, hoping I wouldn't marry someone else. But I just gave him a sneer, then turned my head to stop looking at him. My gaze fell on Nathan, the man I was about to spend the rest of my life with. Nathan was looking at me too, with a deep, moving gaze. Without hesitation, I whispered, "I do." The applause was thunderous, almost drowning out James's anguished wailing. He was being held back as he witnessed Nathan and I passionately kissing. He watched as we went through the entire wedding ceremony. At that moment, he finally understood how heartrending it was to see his lover be intimate with someone else. What's more, the scene I witnessed was even more disgusting. Remorse filled James's heart. He wished he could go back in time and kill the person he was back then. But life cannot be replayed. A mistake is a mistake. This wedding should have been about him and me, but now I'm marrying someone else. Watching my lover marry someone else is the third punishment I've given him. James was beaten up by my mother's men, but he still refused to leave. He stayed outside the hotel door. When the guests had dispersed, I asked Nathan's permission before walking up to James. He looked at me blankly, struggling to force a smile that was even uglier than crying. "Emma, you look beautiful in your wedding dress." I smiled and said thank you. "This beauty originally belonged to you alone. What a pity. However, thank you for coming to my wedding and witnessing Nathan and my happiness." Every word I said pierced his heart and tore apart his forced composure. In the end, he couldn't help but burst into tears. "Emma, we've been together for 7 years. This shouldn't be the end. I just made a mistake that every man makes, and I gave in to temptation for a moment. Can you give me another chance? Emma, you can't be so cruel. You can't sentence me to death for one mistake. How do you know Nathan won't make mistakes in the future?" I was so angry that I couldn't stop laughing. Just as I was about to argue back, Nathan walked over to me. He threw his jacket over my shoulders and said coldly, "Don't define all men with your scumbag comments. You can't resist temptation. You're a self-destructive person. If someone can't even control their lower body, what hope is there for them? Someone like you doesn't deserve Emma. From now on, you'll just have to live with regret, watching as Emma and I live happily ever after." I couldn't help kissing Nathan. He was the perfect advocate for me. This man, who always acted so dominant in front of others, was blushing for me again. James's eyes were wide open, with disbelief. He yelled like he had lost control. "Emma, do you really not love me anymore? Did you run away from the wedding because of him?" he accused angrily. "So you're the one who cheated. You set up that assistant, didn't you? How else would you have happened to find out? And recorded it on surveillance footage?" I was shocked by James' shameless words. I looked at him coldly, and there was no more love in my heart. Walking up to him, I gave him a hard slap and yelled at him, "Shut your stinking mouth. I'm not as disgusting as you are." I was filled with regret. 7 years of my life wasted on him. Do you really think you've got where you are on your own? If my parents hadn't secretly supported you, you'd never have got anywhere. I continued to mock him. "Everyone calls you Mr. Wilson, and you get carried away. Frank casually mentioned it, and you were tempted, which means you've been thinking about it for a long time." James's mind was exposed by my probing, and his face instantly turned pale. But his pride wouldn't allow him to admit it, so he shook his head desperately. "No, it's not like that. I've reached my current position thanks to my own hard work. Emma, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that about you just now. Come back with me, and I'll prove my abilities to you. I can definitely give you happiness." After saying that, he tried to force me into his arms. Nathan, who was standing nearby, would not let him touch me. He immediately kicked him. "Get out! Don't you dare touch Emma with your dirty hands." James let out a painful wail, then collapsed to the ground, covering his stomach and rolling around. He looked at me expectantly, hoping to find a hint of pain in my eyes. Unfortunately, there was none. There was only endless indifference. I looked at him indifferently, my tone cold. "James, go back to wherever you came from. I don't want to see you again." After saying that, I took Nathan's arm and stepped away, never looking back. Today is a special day for Nathan and me. I've wasted so much time on someone who doesn't deserve me, and I feel so sorry for him. Now that things have been resolved, I've completely let go of the past, and it's time to focus on him. Feeling my ardent gaze, his ears unconsciously turned red. Why are you staring at me?" I responded with a light smile. "I'm looking at my husband. Is there a problem? Is that not allowed?" His face turned even redder, and he whispered, "Yes, you can look at me however you like." Looking at this man who was domineering on the outside but pure at heart, I was full of expectations for the future. The next day, James returned to Harbor City in a dejected state. I asked my parents to withdraw their support for him and issued a statement in the circles. Whoever cooperated with him and helped him was against the Parkers and Thompsons. After my family issued a statement, the Parkers followed suit. Our two families united to ostracize him, and James was completely cornered. He didn't even have the opportunity to return to Harbor City to deal with things. Although he had built up some connections over the years, they were nothing in the face of a family like ours. No matter how hard he tried to drum up business, reality would always deal him a heavy blow. He finally realized that those carefree days in the past were all because I had been mediating behind the scenes for him. At that moment, his remorse reached a peak. Because of his impulsiveness at that time, James not only lost the love he had worked so hard to pursue, but also the career he was so proud of. He suffered from insomnia every night. His anxiety had made his face haggard, as if he had aged more than 10 years overnight. Finally, he couldn't help but call me. "Emma, can you let me go?" I sneered and asked him, "Aren't you confident? This is the chance to prove your abilities." James wanted to say something, but I hung up the phone directly and blocked him. Anyway, there is no need to contact each other in the future. In just 2 months, his company's business was almost cut off by more than half. The shareholders withdrew their capital, and the capital chain broke, which was a fatal blow to him. James's company went bankrupt completely, and the once young entrepreneur has now become a debtor that everyone avoids. Those who once surrounded him and adored him have now become the sharpers who mock him. Frank is one of them. On their wedding day, they tore each other apart, and Frank already harbored resentment towards him. Now that he is in trouble, Frank can't wait to add insult to injury. He wants to borrow money, but Frank has informed all his friends in advance not to lend him any. He wants to work part-time to pay off his debts, but Frank has sent someone to cause trouble so that he couldn't continue. When I heard Nathan say all this, I couldn't help laughing out loud. This fall from grace was already his 4th punishment. After that, I almost stopped worrying about James. Life after marriage was even more carefree than I had expected. Nathan was practically a wife-spoiling maniac, knowing everything about me. Sometimes I didn't even need to say anything, and he could guess what I was thinking. I soon became pregnant with his child. This made both families nervous, and they took care of me 24 hours a day. Under their careful care, I long ago put the past behind me. When I heard from James again, it was to tell me he had died. He was stabbed to death in the street by the very person who had been fired by James, Sarah. After she was fired by James, she was blacklisted and couldn't find a job. Her father relied on her salary to pay for his treatment, and it was already a bottomless pit. That's why she desperately wanted to get ahead. And initially, James gave her hints first, which led to her having a relationship with him. However, after the incident, he vented all his anger on her. Not only did he fire her, he also completely cut off her escape route. She lost her salary, couldn't afford to treat her father, and had to watch him die. The intense feeling of guilt finally drove Sarah crazy, and she made an extreme choice. Hearing this, I felt a pang of sorrow. He paid the price for everything he did, after all. This was undoubtedly his deepest punishment. However, none of this has anything to do with me anymore. The person I love now is my first love. Our happy life has just begun.